The willow tree at the edge of Brownsville, Texas, had been Harrison Blake's sole companion for 3 years, its drooping branches providing the only shade for miles along the dusty cattle trail that connected his modest ranch to the growing town. On that sweltering August afternoon in 1878, when he rode up expecting to find nothing but blessed solitude beneath those familiar green curtains, his breath caught at the sight of a young woman sitting against the gnarled trunk, with a leather-bound book open in her lap. Her dark hair was pinned up in a practical style that suggested she was not from the wealthy families that occasionally passed through town, and her simple cotton dress bore the dust of travel. She was so absorbed in her reading that she did not notice his approach until his horse whinnied softly, and when she looked up, her eyes were the color of creek water in springtime, clear and startling. "I am sorry," she said immediately, scrambling to her feet and clutching the book to her chest. "I did not realize this was private property. I will leave at once." Harrison dismounted slowly, removing his hat in a gesture his mother had drilled into him before she passed. "No need for that, miss. This tree does not belong to anyone, though I suppose I have claimed it in my mind after all these years." He studied her face, noting the intelligence in her eyes and the way her shoulders relaxed slightly when she realized he meant her no harm. "I am Harrison Blake. I have a ranch about 2 miles north of here." "Penelope Barrett," she replied, her voice carrying a hint of education that was rare in these parts. "I arrived in Brownsville yesterday with the wagon train. My uncle owns the Mercantile on Main Street." Harrison knew the Mercantile well, had been buying supplies there for years from old Gerald Barrett, a widower who kept mostly to himself. "I did not know Gerald had family coming." He did not know either, not until my letter arrived last month. Penelope's expression clouded briefly. "My parents died of fever back in Missouri. Uncle Gerald was my only living relative, and he was kind enough to take me in." The words were matter of fact, but Harrison heard the grief beneath them, recognized it because he carried his own. "I am sorry for your loss." She nodded, then glanced down at the book in her hands as if seeking comfort from it. "Thank you. Reading helps. It always has." Harrison found himself wanting to prolong this unexpected encounter, something in her presence easing the loneliness that had become as familiar as breathing. "What are you reading, Jane Eyre? Have you read it?" He shook his head. "I am not much for novels, mostly just ranch ledgers and the occasional newspaper when I make it to town." A small smile touched her lips, the first he had seen, and it transformed her face entirely. "That sounds terribly dull." "It is," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "Terribly dull indeed." They stood there in the dappled shade of the willow, the afternoon heat pressing down on the Texas landscape around them, and Harrison made a decision that would change the course of his life. He gestured to the base of the tree. "Would you mind if I sat for a while? I was heading back to the ranch, but I find I am in no particular hurry." Penelope considered this, her eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she settled back down against the trunk and opened her book once more. "I would not mind at all." Harrison sat down a respectful distance away, close enough to hear the rustle of pages as she read but far enough to maintain propriety. He leaned back against the tree and closed his eyes, listening to the sound of her breathing and the whisper of wind through the willow branches. For the first time in 3 years, since his wife Sarah had died giving birth to a stillborn son, he felt something other than the hollow ache that had taken up residence in his chest. Time passed in comfortable silence. The sun moved across the sky, and Harrison opened his eyes to find Penelope watching him with curiosity. "You always fall asleep under trees?" she asked, and there was a hint of teasing in her voice that made his heart beat faster. "Only when there is good company," he replied, then felt heat rise to his face at his own boldness. But Penelope only smiled again, that same transformation that made her eyes light up. "I should be getting back. Uncle Gerald will worry if I am gone too long." Harrison stood and offered his hand to help her up. When her fingers touched his, even through the fabric of her gloves, he felt a jolt of something electric and startling. She felt it too. He could tell by the way her breath hitched slightly, by the color that rose in her cheeks. "May I walk you back to town?" he asked, not wanting this afternoon to end. "I would like that." He led his horse by the reins as they walked the dusty road toward Brownsville, and they talked the whole way. She told him about Missouri, about her parents who had been school teachers, about how she had learned to read before she could properly walk. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle and the endless work, about how the land could be both brutal and beautiful in equal measure. When they reached the edge of town, where the buildings began to cluster together and the sounds of civilization grew louder, Penelope turned to him. "Will you be at the Willow Tree again?" "Tomorrow," Harrison said without hesitation. "I will be there tomorrow." Her smile was radiant. "Then so will I." He watched her walk toward the mercantile, her book still clutched in one hand, and felt something he thought had died with Sarah stir back to life in his chest. It was not the same feeling, he recognized that immediately. What he had felt for Sarah had been the comfortable affection of childhood friends who became sweethearts, a love built on shared history and family expectations. This was something different, something that felt like lightning striking dry ground. That night, Harrison lay in his empty bed in the ranch house and thought about creek-colored eyes and the sound of turning pages. He thought about how right it had felt to sit beside her, how the loneliness that had been his constant companion for 3 years had lifted like morning fog. The next day, he rode to the Willow Tree with his heart pounding in anticipation. She was already there, sitting in the same spot with a different book in her lap. When she saw him, her whole face brightened, and Harrison knew with absolute certainty that he was going to fall in love with this woman if he had not already started. "You came," she said, as if there had been any doubt. "I said I would." He dismounted and sat down beside her closer than he had the day before. "What are you reading today?" "Poetry. Walt Whitman. Do you know his work?" "Cannot say that I do." Penelope's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief. "Would you like me to read to you?" Harrison found himself nodding before he could think better of it. "I would like that very much." Her voice was soft but clear as she read, the words painting pictures he had never considered before. He watched her face as she read, the way her expressions changed with the rhythm of the poetry, the passion that infused every syllable. When she finished a particular poem about the open road and freedom, she looked up and found him staring. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "That I have never met anyone like you," he answered truthfully. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Penelope closed the book carefully, marking her place with a ribbon. "I have never met anyone like you either, Harrison Blake. I am just a rancher." "Nothing special about that in Texas." "You are wrong." She shifted slightly, turning to face him more fully. "You are kind. You listened to me read poetry without complaint. You made me feel safe yesterday when you could have been a threat. Those things are special anywhere, but especially here." Harrison felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your uncle, does he know you are spending time out here?" "I told him I wanted to explore the countryside, to find places to read in peace. He understands. He has always been a reader himself." She paused, then added carefully, "Does it bother anyone that you come here?" "There is no one to be bothered," Harrison said, the words carrying the weight of his loneliness. "I live alone on the ranch, have for 3 years now." Penelope reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. The gesture was bold for a proper young woman, but it felt right. "I am sorry, that must be very difficult." "It has been," he admitted. "Until yesterday." They sat hand in hand under the willow tree as the sun climbed higher, and Harrison told her things he had never told another living soul. He told her about Sarah, about the guilt he carried for not being able to save her or their son, about how the ranch house felt like a mausoleum filled with ghosts. She listened without judgment, her hand warm and solid in his, and when he finally fell silent, she shared her own pain. "Sometimes I feel guilty for being alive when they are not," she confessed, speaking of her parents. "I was the one who was supposed to go into town that day, but Mother went instead to let me finish reading a book. She caught the fever there, brought it back to Father, and within 2 weeks they were both gone." "That was not your fault," Harrison said firmly. "I know, in my head I know, but my heart has been slower to accept it." She looked at him with those creek water eyes. "Until yesterday I thought I would carry this weight alone forever." "You do not have to," Harrison said, and brought her hand up to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Not anymore." From that day forward, they met at the willow tree every afternoon. Harrison rearranged his ranch work to ensure he could be there, and Penelope took to bringing a basket with sandwiches and fruit that they shared while she read to him, or they simply talked about everything and nothing. A week passed, then 2, and Harrison felt himself falling deeper with each passing day. He learned that Penelope was 22 years old, 3 years younger than him, and that she had dreamed of becoming a teacher like her parents. He learned that she loved thunderstorms and was afraid of snakes, that she could recite entire passages of her favorite books from memory, and that when she laughed, really laughed, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. She learned that he was patient and thoughtful, that he had a way with animals that bordered on magical, that he had built his ranch from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. She learned about his dreams to expand the operation, to maybe hire some help so the work would not be so crushing, and about how he had stopped dreaming entirely after Sarah died. On the 15th day of their meetings, Harrison arrived at the willow tree to find Penelope pacing beneath it, her face troubled. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, dismounting quickly. "Uncle Gerald wants to introduce me to some of the eligible men in town," she said, her voice tight with distress. "He says it is not proper for a young woman to be unmarried at my age, that I need to start thinking about my future." Harrison felt his stomach drop. "What did you tell him?" "That I am still mourning my parents, that I need more time." She stopped pacing and looked at him directly. "But the truth is that I cannot imagine marrying anyone else because I have already given my heart away." The world seemed to stop turning. Harrison crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and took her face in his hands. "Say that again." "I love you, Harrison Blake," Penelope whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I have tried not to because it seemed too fast, too impossible, but I cannot help it. I love you." "I love you too," he said, and then he was kissing her, pouring 3 years of loneliness and 2 weeks of falling into that kiss. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, and when they finally broke apart, both breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said urgently. "Marry me, Penelope. Come to the ranch and make it a home instead of a house. Fill it with books and laughter and life again." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They held each other under the willow tree, and Harrison sent up a silent prayer of thanks to whatever force had brought her into his life. When they finally separated, he kept hold of her hand, unwilling to let go. "I should speak to your uncle," he said. "Do it properly." Penelope nodded, her face glowing with happiness. He will ask about your prospects, about whether you can provide for me. The ranch is small but profitable. I own the land outright, no debts. I can give you a good life, Penelope. Maybe not a fancy one, but a good one. I do not want fancy, she assured him. I want real. I want you. They walked into Brownsville together, still hand in hand, drawing curious looks from the townspeople who were not accustomed to seeing the reclusive Harrison Blake with anyone, let alone the new schoolteacher's niece. The mercantile was busy when they arrived, and Gerald Barrett looked up from helping a customer to see his niece and Harrison standing together with obvious intention written on their faces. He finished with the customer, then gestured for them to follow him into the back room where he kept his office. Gerald was a man in his late 50s, weathered by life and loss, but his eyes were sharp and assessing as he looked at Harrison. "Mr. Blake," he said evenly, "I assume you are here about Penelope." "Yes, sir. I am here to ask for her hand in marriage." Gerald was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between them. "You two have only known each other for 2 weeks. 15 days, Penelope corrected softly. "And in that time, I have come to know Harrison better than I knew some people I grew up with. He is good and kind and honest, Uncle Gerald. He makes me happy in a way I did not think was possible anymore." "What about you, Mr. Blake?" Gerald asked. "Why should I give you permission to marry my niece?" Harrison met the older man's eyes steadily. "Because I love her, sir. Because I will spend every day of my life making sure she knows she is treasured. Because I know what it is to lose someone, and I will never take a single moment with her for granted. I own a working cattle ranch 2 miles north of here. It is small but profitable, and I can provide for her comfortably. More importantly, I can promise you that she will be respected and protected and loved for as long as I draw breath." Gerald studied him for another long moment, then slowly nodded. "I knew your father, Harrison. He was a good man, and from what I have seen, you take after him. My niece is all the family I have left in this world, and I want her to be happy." He looked at Penelope. "Are you sure about this, girl?" "I have never been more sure of anything," she said firmly. "Then you have my blessing." Gerald extended his hand to Harrison, who shook it gratefully. "But I expect a proper engagement period. No rushing off to get married tomorrow. Give the town a chance to get used to the idea and give you both time to be certain." "Of course," Harrison agreed, though his heart was racing with the desire to make Penelope his wife as soon as possible. "Would a month be acceptable?" 2 months, Gerald countered. "That will give Penelope time to prepare properly and for you to make ready at the ranch." Harrison looked at Penelope, who nodded her agreement. 2 months then. They emerged from the office to find several curious customers trying very hard to pretend they had not been listening. By sunset, the entire town of Brownsville would know that Harrison Blake, the lonely rancher, was engaged to marry Penelope Barrett, the pretty raider from Missouri. The next 2 months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Harrison threw himself into fixing up the ranch house, repairing things he had let slide in his grief, painting walls and mending fences. He ordered new furniture from the catalog, including a bookshelf he built himself with careful attention to detail, knowing how much Penelope's books meant to her. They continued to meet at the Willow tree every day, but now their time together included planning their future. Penelope told him about the kind of home she wanted to create, warm and welcoming, a place where people would feel comfortable visiting. Harrison told her about his plans to expand the herd, maybe hire a hand or two so he would have more time to spend with his wife. They also took walks through town together, attending church services and community gatherings, allowing people to see them as a couple. The townspeople were kind, for the most part, happy to see Harrison emerging from his self-imposed isolation. There were a few who whispered about the short courtship, but most understood that life was uncertain on the frontier, and when you found happiness, you held on to it. 3 weeks before the wedding, Harrison took Penelope to see the ranch for the first time. She sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hand resting on his arm as they traveled the familiar road. When they crested the small rise and the house came into view, nestled in a shallow valley with the cattle grazing in the distance, she gasped softly, "Harrison, it is beautiful." It was not really. The house was simple, single-story with a wide porch, built more for function than aesthetics. But the land around it was indeed beautiful, rolling hills dotted with mesquite trees, a creek running through the eastern pasture, and the endless Texas sky stretching overhead. He helped her down from the wagon and led her inside, nervous about her reaction. But Penelope moved through the rooms with growing delight, exclaiming over the bookshelf he had built, the new curtains he had attempted to hang somewhat crookedly, the cheerful yellow paint in the kitchen. "You did all this for me?" she asked, turning to him with tears in her eyes. "I wanted you to feel at home here." She crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "I would feel at home anywhere with you." They spent the afternoon at the ranch, with Harrison showing her around the property, introducing her to his favorite horse, a gentle mare named Rosie, and explaining the daily rhythms of ranch life. Penelope listened attentively, asking intelligent questions, and Harrison could already imagine her fitting seamlessly into this life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat together on the porch steps. Harrison had his arm around Penelope's shoulders, and she leaned into him contentedly. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. "Of what?" "Of getting married again. Of losing someone else." Harrison was silent for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Terrified," he admitted, "but more afraid of not taking this chance, of living the rest of my life without you. What Sarah and I had was good, but it was also safe and expected. What I feel for you is different. It is wild and fierce and consuming. If I lost you, it would destroy me completely, but I would rather risk that than never have you at all." Penelope turned in his arms to face him. "I am afraid too, but I choose you anyway, Harrison. I choose this life with you, whatever it brings." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Harrison felt a sense of rightness settle into his bones. This woman, this love, was worth every risk. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning in 1878 in the small church at the center of Brownsville. Penelope wore a simple white dress that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her frame, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Harrison had picked himself that morning. He wore his best suit, the one he had not touched since Sarah's funeral, and his hands shook slightly as Penelope walked down the aisle toward him. She was radiant, her face glowing with happiness, and when she reached his side and placed her hand in his, Harrison felt complete in a way he never had before. The ceremony was brief, conducted by Pastor Williams, who had known Harrison since boyhood, and when Harrison was finally given permission to kiss his bride, he did so with tender reverence, sealing their promises before God and the assembled townspeople. The reception was held in the church hall, with food provided by the community and music played by old Jacob Miller on his fiddle. Harrison and Penelope danced together, laughing as he admitted he was terrible at dancing, and she was stepped on his feet more than once. "I do not care," she said, smiling up at him. "I would dance with you every day for the rest of my life and never complain." "I will hold you to that, Mrs. Blake." Her eyes sparkled at the name. "Say it again." "Mrs. Blake, my wife, Penelope Blake." "I love the sound of that," she whispered. As the afternoon wore on, guests began to depart, offering their congratulations and well wishes. Gerald pulled his niece aside for a private word, and Harrison saw the older man's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Be happy, girl," Gerald said gruffly. "That is all I have ever wanted for you." "I will be," Penelope assured him, hugging her uncle tightly. "Thank you for everything, Uncle Gerald, for taking me in, for giving me a home, for letting me find love." Finally, as the sun began its descent, Harrison and Penelope climbed onto the wagon loaded with her belongings and started the journey to the ranch. She sat close beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, and they talked quietly about the day, about how beautiful everything had been, about how strange and wonderful it was to be married. When they arrived at the ranch house, Harrison insisted on carrying her over the threshold, despite her laughing protests that it was not necessary. He set her down gently in the front room, and suddenly the air between them shifted, filled with awareness and anticipation. "Are you tired?" Harrison asked, his voice rougher than usual. Penelope shook her head, her cheeks flushed. "No, are you? Not even a little." He took her hand and led her to the bedroom, to the bed he had made up with fresh linens that morning. They came together with a mixture of nervousness and passion, learning each other in the lamplight, and Harrison marveled at the trust Penelope placed in him, at the gift of her love and her body. Later, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Penelope's head resting on Harrison's chest, his fingers trailing through her unbound hair. "I love you," she whispered into the quiet. "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Harrison's last thought before dreams claimed him was that he was finally, truly home. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them, learning to share space and lives, but it was a joyful adjustment. Penelope threw herself into making the ranch house a home, adding touches of comfort and beauty wherever she could. She planted a small garden near the kitchen door, filled with herbs and vegetables, and arranged her books on the shelf Harrison had built with loving care. She also surprised him with her willingness to learn about ranch work. While she did not have the physical strength for some tasks, she proved adept at tending the chickens Harrison purchased so they could have fresh eggs, and she took over managing the household accounts with an efficiency that freed him to focus on the cattle. Every evening, after the work was done and they had eaten dinner together, Penelope would read aloud to Harrison while he whittled or mended tack. Her voice became the soundtrack of his happiness, and he found himself falling more deeply in love with her with each passing day. Winter came to the Texas plains, bringing cold winds and occasional frost. Harrison taught Penelope to ride properly so she could accompany him on short trips around the ranch, and they spent long evenings by the fire, talking about their dreams for the future. "I would like to have children," Penelope said one night, her head resting in Harrison's lap as he stroked her hair. "A whole houseful of them, running and playing and filling this place with noise." Harrison's hand stilled momentarily, old grief rising up, but Penelope caught his hand and brought it to her lips. "I know you are afraid," she said gently. "But I am strong, Harrison, and medicine has improved since Sarah's time. Dr. Mitchell in town is young and progressive. He studied back east and knows the latest techniques." "I could not bear to lose you," Harrison said, his voice tight with emotion. "You will not lose me, I promise you that." She sat up and took his face in her hands. "I want to build a family with you, my love. I want to give you the children that will carry on your name and work this land after we are gone, but only if you are ready. I will not push you." Harrison looked into her eyes and saw such certainty there, such faith in their future, that his fear began to ease. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "You did not find me," she corrected with a smile. "I found you, or rather, your willow tree found us both." "Our willow tree," he said, and kissed her deeply. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new calves, and with it came the news that Penelope was expecting their first child. Harrison's reaction was a complicated mixture of joy and terror, but Penelope remained calm and confident, visiting Dr. Mitchell regularly and following his instructions carefully. As her belly grew round with their child, Harrison found himself constantly amazed by the miracle of it. He would rest his hand on her stomach and feel the baby kick, and each movement was a reassurance that this time would be different, that this time there would be life and laughter instead of grief. They made preparations throughout the summer, converting the small room next to their bedroom into a nursery. Penelope sewed tiny clothes while Harrison built a cradle from oak wood, carving designs into the headboard with painstaking care. The townspeople were generous, bringing gifts and advice, and Gerald visited regularly to check on his niece. In late September of 1879, just over a year after they had first met under the willow tree, Penelope went into labor. Harrison rode hard into town to fetch Dr. Mitchell, his heart pounding with fear and anticipation. The doctor arrived quickly, bringing his medical bag and a calm demeanor that helped settle Harrison's nerves. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Harrison stayed by Penelope's side the entire time, holding her hand, offering her water and encouraging words even when his own fear threatened to overwhelm him. Dr. Mitchell proved his worth, guiding Penelope through the process with expertise and patience. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith on that September afternoon, the sound of a baby's cry filled the ranch house. Harrison felt tears streaming down his face as Dr. Mitchell placed a squirming, red-faced infant in Penelope's arms. "A son," the doctor announced with a smile. "A healthy baby boy." Penelope looked exhausted but radiant as she gazed down at their child. "Harrison, come meet your son." Harrison approached on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny person they had created. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving his small fists in the air, already protesting his entry into the world. "He is perfect," Harrison whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his, and Harrison felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Penelope asked, looking up at her husband. Harrison thought for a moment, then said, "Henry, after your father." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks. "Henry Barrett Blake. It is perfect." Dr. Mitchell checked Penelope thoroughly, pronouncing her healthy and strong, and gave Harrison detailed instructions for her care over the next few weeks. He stayed long enough to ensure mother and baby were stable, then departed with Harrison's profuse thanks and a generous payment. That night, Harrison sat in the rocking chair beside their bed, holding his son while Penelope slept. He rocked gently, studying every feature of Henry's face, overwhelmed by the love and protectiveness he felt. This was his son, his family, his future. "I will take care of you," he promised the sleeping infant. "I will teach you to ride and work the land and be a good man. I will love you and your mother with everything I have, every single day. You have given me something I thought I had lost forever, little one. You have given me hope." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Henry proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who demanded attention at all hours. Penelope managed motherhood with the same grace she brought to everything else, though Harrison often found her reading to the baby from her beloved books, convinced that it was never too early to instill a love of literature. Harrison hired a ranch hand, a young man named Tom who had just arrived from Kansas and needed work. This freed up more of his time to spend with Penelope and Henry, and he cherished every moment. He loved coming in from the fields to find his wife and son waiting for him, loved the way Henry's face would light up when he saw his father, loved the family they had built together. On their first wedding anniversary, Harrison took Penelope and baby Henry to the willow tree where everything had begun. They spread a blanket under the drooping branches, and Penelope nursed Henry while Harrison lay beside them, propped up on one elbow. "You remember the first day we met?" Penelope asked, a soft smile on her face. "How could I forget? You were sitting right there reading Jane Eyre, and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I thought you were going to tell me to leave." "I thought about never leaving," Harrison admitted. "From that very first day, something in me knew you were going to change my life." Penelope reached over and took his hand. "You changed mine too. You saved me, Harrison. I was so lost in my grief, so alone in the world, and then you sat down under this tree and gave me hope that I could be happy again." "We saved each other," Harrison corrected, bringing her hand to his lips. Henry finished nursing, and Penelope handed him to Harrison, who settled the baby against his shoulder, patting his back gently. They sat there under the willow tree, their family complete and perfect, and Harrison sent up a prayer of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. The years flowed by like water in the creek that ran through Harrison's property, each season bringing new joys and challenges. Henry grew from a baby into a toddler, then a small boy with his mother's intelligence and his father's quiet determination. In 1881, Penelope gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Hope, and 2 years later, another son they called James. The ranch prospered under Harrison's careful management and Penelope's sharp business sense. They expanded the herd, purchased additional land, and built a larger barn. Tom proved to be a loyal and capable employee, and they eventually hired 2 more hands to help with the growing operation. The house expanded too, with Harrison adding rooms as the family grew. Penelope's bookshelf multiplied into several, filling up corners of every room, and the sound of children's laughter became the music of their days. Through it all, Harrison and Penelope maintained the tradition they had started during their courtship. Every week, unless weather or circumstance made it impossible, they returned to their willow tree. Sometimes they brought the children, letting them play in the grass while their parents sat close together. Sometimes they went alone, stealing precious hours of solitude to reconnect and remember. The willow became a symbol for their family, a reminder of how love could grow in unexpected places, how loneliness could transform into belonging. Harrison carved their initials into the trunk, along with the date they first met, and each child added their own mark as they grew old enough. Brownsville grew around them, evolving from a rough frontier town into a proper community with a school, a church, and even a small library that Penelope helped establish. She became known for her literacy work, teaching children and adults alike to read, often donating books from her personal collection to those who could not afford their own. Harrison became respected as a fair employer and a savvy rancher, known for his integrity and his devotion to his family. The loneliness that had once defined him became a distant memory, replaced by a life so full of love and purpose that sometimes he had to stop and marvel at it. In the spring of 1885, Gerald Barrett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 63. His death hit Penelope hard, as he had been her last link to her parents, but Harrison held her through her grief, and the children provided distraction and comfort. They buried Gerald in the Brownsville cemetery, and Harrison made sure his headstone was the finest marble they could afford, a small repayment for the man who had given him permission to marry the love of his life. Gerald left the mercantile to Penelope, and after much discussion, they decided to sell it to a young couple just starting out. The money went into the ranch, allowing them to purchase prime breeding cattle from Mexico and further improve their stock. By 1887, Harrison Blake was 34 years old and could hardly recognize the lonely, grief-stricken man he had been 9 years earlier. He had a wife he adored, 3 healthy children who brought him joy every day, and a successful ranch that would provide for his family for generations to come. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Harrison and Penelope sat on their porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Penelope was leaning against him, his arm around her shoulders, and everything was peaceful. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Penelope asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "All the time," Harrison admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding past the willow tree that day, to missing you entirely because I was too wrapped up in my own misery to notice." "But you did not ride past. You stopped. Best decision I ever made." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You know what I realized the other day?" "What?" "I do not remember what Sarah looked like anymore, not clearly. I can remember facts about her, memories of things we did, but I cannot picture her face, and I do not feel guilty about it anymore." Penelope was quiet for a moment, then said, "That does not mean you did not love her. I know. But what I feel for you is so much bigger, so much more real that everything before you seems like a dream. You are my reality, Penelope. You and our children and this life we have built. That is what is real. I love you, Harrison Blake," she said, tilting her head up to look at him. "More with every passing year. I love you too. More than words can express." They kissed under the stars, and Harrison thought about the willow tree, about books and loneliness, and the unexpected paths that lead to happiness. He thought about how grief and loss, while terrible, could also clear space for new love to grow. He thought about fate and choice, and the courage it takes to open your heart after it has been broken. As 1890 approached, bringing with it a new decade, the Blake family continued to thrive. Henry was now 10 years old, a serious boy who loved the ranch and already showed signs of being a natural cattleman. Hope, at 8, had inherited her mother's love of books and could often be found reading to her younger brother James, who at 6 was the wildest and most adventurous of the 3. In the spring of 1890, Penelope discovered she was pregnant once more, a surprise that delighted them both. She was 33 now, Harrison 37, and they had not expected to have more children. But this baby felt like a gift, a final addition to their family. The pregnancy was easier than the others had been, and in December of that year, Penelope gave birth to twin girls. The delivery was challenging, with Dr. Mitchell working tirelessly through the night. But when dawn broke, 2 healthy baby girls lay in the cradle Harrison had made, wrapped in blankets Penelope had sewn. They named them Grace and Joy, feeling the names perfectly captured what they brought to the family. Henry was fascinated by the babies, taking his role as big brother seriously. Hope loved helping her mother care for them, and James was slightly bewildered by the sudden doubling of babies but adjusted quickly. The ranch house was now filled to bursting with life and noise, with laughter and occasional arguments, with the chaos and beauty of a large family. Harrison had to hire more help to manage the ranch so he could spend time with his children, teaching the older ones to ride and rope, reading to them at night as Penelope had once read to him. On quiet evenings, when the children were finally asleep and the house was peaceful, Harrison and Penelope would sit together and talk about their blessings. They spoke of the ranch's success, of their healthy children, of the community they were part of, but mostly they spoke of their love for each other. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life," Penelope said one night, nestled against Harrison's side, "that I got to have all of this." "You deserve it all and more," Harrison replied. "You brought me back to life, Penelope. Before you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You taught me how to live again." "We taught each other," she corrected gently. "You showed me that it was possible to love again after loss, that opening your heart was worth the risk." As the years continued to pass, the children grew and changed. Henry became Harrison's right hand on the ranch, learning everything his father could teach him about cattle and land management. Hope developed into a talented teacher, often helping the younger children in town with their lessons. James proved to be gifted with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animal with patience and kindness. The twins, Grace and Joy, were inseparable and brought lightness and laughter wherever they went. By 1895, Harrison was 42 and Penelope was 38. Their oldest, Henry, was now 15 and nearly a man grown. The ranch had expanded significantly, now one of the most successful operations in the region. They had built a proper bunkhouse for the hands they employed, had improved the main house even further, and had established themselves as pillars of the Brownsville community. But despite all their success and the busy chaos of raising 5 children, Harrison and Penelope never forgot to nurture their own relationship. They still stole away to the willow tree when they could, still read together in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. Their love had not diminished with time or familiarity. Instead, it had deepened and strengthened, becoming the bedrock upon which their entire family was built. One afternoon in the spring of 1896, Harrison took Penelope to the willow tree for a special reason. The children were all occupied, Henry overseeing the hands, Hope teaching the younger ones their lessons, and he had arranged for Tom's wife to watch the twins for a few hours. They rode together on Rosie, who was old now but still gentle and reliable, and when they reached the willow tree, Harrison helped Penelope down and led her to their favorite spot under the branches. "What is this about?" she asked, curious about his secretive behavior. Harrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "We have been married 17 years now, and I never properly gave you an engagement ring. We were too busy with the wedding and starting our life together, and there never seemed to be a right time." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond set in it. "I want you to have this now, as a symbol of everything we have built together, everything we have survived and celebrated. You are my life, Penelope Blake, my heart and my home and my greatest adventure." Tears streamed down Penelope's face as Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger below her wedding band. "Harrison, it is beautiful. You did not have to do this. I know, but I wanted to. I wanted you to have something that represents how I feel about you, how grateful I am that you chose to sit under this tree 17 years ago and let a lonely cowboy join you." Penelope threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the passion and love of their years together. "I would choose you again and again in every lifetime. You are everything to me." They sat under the willow tree, holding each other, and Harrison thought about the passage of time, about how quickly years could flow by when you were happy. He thought about his children, about the legacy he and Penelope were creating, about the love that had started here under these branches and grown to encompass so much. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Penelope pulled out a small book from her pocket. It was worn and well-loved, the same copy of Jane Eyre she had been reading the day they met. "Read to me," Harrison asked, settling back against the tree trunk. Penelope smiled and opened the book, not to the beginning or the end, but to a passage she had marked with a ribbon long ago. Her voice was soft but clear as she read the famous words, "I have for the first time found what I can truly love. I have found you." Harrison closed his eyes and listened, content in a way that went bone deep. This was his life, this woman and her voice and the willow tree that had brought them together. This was his happiness, earned through grief and loneliness, but all the sweeter for it. The years continued their steady march forward. Henry married at 21, bringing his bride Sarah to live on the ranch in a house Harrison helped him build on the eastern section of their land. Hope became the official schoolteacher in Brownsville at 19, respected and beloved by her students. James left for 2 years to work on a ranch in Wyoming, learning different methods and techniques, before returning home with new ideas and a fiancée named Catherine. Grace and Joy, the twins, grew into beautiful young women with very different personalities. Grace was practical and organized, taking over management of the household accounts and the business side of the ranch. Joy was artistic and free-spirited, painting landscapes of the Texas plains that became sought after by collectors as far away as Dallas. Through all of this, Harrison and Penelope watched with pride and joy, marveling at the people their children had become. They became grandparents in 1902 when Henry and Sarah welcomed a son, and over the next several years, more grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with a new generation. Harrison was now in his 50s, his dark hair liberally streaked with gray, but he was healthy and strong, still able to put in a full day's work on the ranch. Penelope had aged gracefully, her beauty deepening rather than fading, and she remained the center around which their family orbited. In the summer of 1905, they celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary with a gathering of their entire family. Children and grandchildren filled the ranch house and spilled out onto the porch and yard. There was food and music and laughter, stories told and memories shared. As the celebration wound down and the younger grandchildren were put to bed, Harrison stood up and called for everyone's attention. Penelope looked at him curiously, not knowing what he planned. 27 years ago, Harrison began, his voice carrying across the assembled family, I was the loneliest man in Texas. I had lost my first wife and child, and I was just going through the motions of living without really being alive. Then one day, I rode to a willow tree that had become my refuge, and I found a beautiful young woman sitting there reading a book. He looked at Penelope, his eyes full of love. I sat down next to her that day, and I never left her side. She became my wife, my partner, my best friend, and the mother of my children. Everything you see here, all of this love and family and happiness, started because she let a lonely cowboy sit under her tree. Harrison raised his glass. To Penelope, the love of my life. Thank you for every day, every moment, every memory. Thank you for our children and grandchildren. Thank you for making a house into a home and a life worth living. I love you more today than I did when we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Everyone raised their glasses and toasted Penelope, who was crying happy tears. When the cheering died down, she stood and crossed to her husband, taking his hands in hers. You say I saved you, she said, her voice thick with emotion, but you saved me too. I was adrift in the world, grieving and lost, and you gave me a home and a purpose and a love I had never imagined possible. These 27 years have been the greatest gift of my life. I love you, Harrison Blake, with everything I am and everything I will ever be. They kissed to the applause and cheers of their family. And as Harrison held his wife close, he thought about the willow tree, about fate and choice and the courage to love again. He thought about the girl reading under the tree and the lonely cowboy who decided to stay. He thought about all the days and years that had flowed from that single decision, about the family they had built and the love that sustained them. Time continued its inexorable march, as it always does. The children grew older, the grandchildren multiplied, and the ranch continued to thrive under the combined efforts of the family. Henry took over more of the day-to-day operations as Harrison aged, but Harrison still spent time with the cattle, still rode the property, still took great joy in the work of his hands. In 1910, Harrison turned 57 and Penelope 53. They were grandparents to 12 grandchildren now, ranging in age from 8 to 1, and the ranch house they had built together was the heart of a sprawling family enterprise. On a warm September afternoon, Harrison suggested to Penelope that they visit their willow tree. They had not been in several months, busy with harvest and family obligations, and he felt the need to return to the place where everything had begun. They rode together on a young mare, since Rosie had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 years earlier, and made their way to the familiar spot. The willow had grown even larger over the years, its branches sweeping nearly to the ground, creating a private green sanctuary. They dismounted and walked hand in hand under the branches, and Harrison felt the same sense of peace he always found here. This tree had witnessed their entire love story, had sheltered them through courtship and marriage, through joy and sorrow, through all the moments that made up a life. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked suddenly. "Marrying me, coming to the ranch, giving up the possibility of a different life?" Penelope stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious. "Not for a single second. Harrison, you gave me everything I never knew I needed. You gave me love and children and a home. You gave me a purpose and a partnership that has challenged and fulfilled me. How could I possibly regret the best decision I ever made?" "I needed to hear that," he admitted. "I am getting older, and sometimes I worry that I took too much from you, that you gave up too much to be with me." "The only thing I gave up was loneliness," Penelope said firmly. "Everything else has been gain. Every single day with you has been a gift." She reached up and touched his face gently. "We have been so blessed, my love. We found each other when we both needed saving, and we built something beautiful together. Our children are good people, our grandchildren are thriving, and we still love each other after all these years. How many people can say that?" Harrison pulled her close and held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling grateful beyond words. They stood there under the willow tree, two people who had found each other against the odds and built a life together through love and determination. As the sun set and the Texas sky blazed with color, they finally climbed back on the horse and headed home to the ranch. Their family would be waiting for them, dinner would need to be served, and there would be grandchildren wanting stories and attention. But for this moment, riding slowly through the gathering dusk with his wife's arms around his waist, Harrison was completely content. The years moved on as they always do, bringing both joy and sorrow. In 1912, they lost James to a riding accident, a tragedy that devastated the family. Harrison and Penelope leaned on each other through their grief, supporting their daughter-in-law Catherine and their motherless grandchildren, holding the family together through sheer force of love. They also celebrated happy occasions. Hope married late, at 33, to a professor from Austin who adored her intelligence and passion for teaching. Grace found love with a banker from San Antonio, while Joy never married but lived a fulfilling life creating art and teaching painting to children. By 1915, Harrison was 62 and Penelope 58. They were slowing down, leaving more of the ranch operations to Henry and his sons, but they were still active and engaged with their family. They had 14 grandchildren now, with more on the way, and the Blake name was well respected throughout Texas. One evening in late spring, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Penelope mentioned that the willow tree had been looking poorly lately, some of its branches dying back. "Trees do not live forever," Harrison said philosophically, "even our willow." "But it is our tree," Penelope protested. "The place where everything started. I cannot imagine it not being there." Harrison took her hand. "The tree might not last forever, but what it represents does. Our love, our family, everything we built, that will outlast any tree." They decided to visit the willow the next day, wanting to see it for themselves. When they arrived, they could see that Penelope was right. Several large branches had died, and the tree looked tired, ancient in a way it had not before. "We should plant another," Penelope said, looking up at the drooping branches. "A young willow that can grow and be here for our grandchildren and their children." Harrison loved the idea immediately. They found a spot near the original tree and planted a young willow sapling, watering it carefully and marking the spot. It would take years to grow, but they would be patient. That was what love required sometimes, patience and faith that good things would come. As they stood together looking at the small sapling and the grand old tree, Harrison said, "Do you remember what you were reading that first day, Jane Eyre?" Penelope answered immediately. "I will never forget." "Read it to me again," he asked. "Tonight after dinner. Start from the beginning like you did all those years ago." That night, after their family had gone to their various homes and the ranch was quiet, Penelope pulled out her battered copy of Jane Eyre and began to read. Harrison listened with his eyes closed, transported back to that first afternoon under the willow tree when his life had changed forever. The 1920s arrived, bringing changes to Texas and to the Blake family. The ranch continued to prosper under Henry's management, and more grandchildren arrived, and eventually great-grandchildren, the fourth generation of Blakes to call the ranch home. Harrison was now in his late 60s, Penelope in her mid-60s, and they had officially retired from ranch operations, leaving everything in Henry's capable hands. They spent their days reading, gardening, and most importantly, being with family. The great-grandchildren loved visiting them, hearing stories about the old days, about how their great-grandparents had met under a willow tree. The original willow finally died in 1923, its massive trunk hollow and its branches bare. The family held a small ceremony, acknowledging what the tree had meant to Harrison and Penelope before cutting it down for safety. But the sapling they had planted was now nearly as tall as a man, growing strong and healthy, ready to carry on the legacy. In 1925, Harrison and Penelope celebrated their 47th wedding anniversary. The celebration was smaller than some of the others had been, just immediate family, but it was filled with love. Their children gave speeches, their grandchildren performed songs, and their great-grandchildren presented pictures they had drawn. When it was over and they were alone in their bedroom, Penelope turned to Harrison and said, 47 years. Can you believe it?" "Best 47 years of my life," he replied, pulling her into his arms. They moved more slowly now, their bodies aged and weathered, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. "You think we will make it to 50? Penelope asked, a hint of worry in her voice. "We will make it to 100 if I have anything to say about it," Harrison declared. "I am not ready to let you go yet." "Good, because I am not ready to go anywhere." They held each other close, two people who had found love under a willow tree and nurtured it for nearly 5 decades. They had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, had raised children and buried one, had built an empire from dirt and determination. Through it all, their love had been the constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. On a perfect spring day in 1928, exactly 50 years after they had first met under the willow tree, Harrison took Penelope back to that sacred spot. The young willow they had planted was now tall and graceful, its branches beginning to droop in that characteristic way, creating shade and shelter. Henry and the rest of the family had gone ahead and prepared a surprise. When Harrison and Penelope arrived, they found tables set up with food, flowers decorating the area, and their entire family gathered to celebrate 50 years since the day a lonely cowboy had sat down next to a girl reading a book and changed both their lives forever. There were tears and laughter, stories and memories shared. The grandchildren talked about how their grandparents' love story had been the model for their own relationships, how they had learned what commitment and partnership truly meant by watching Harrison and Penelope together. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the willow branches, Harrison stood up with difficulty, his joints stiff with age, and offered his hand to Penelope. She took it, and they stood together in the center of their family. 50 years ago, Harrison began, his voice still strong despite his 75 years. I came to a willow tree looking for solitude. Instead, I found everything I did not know I needed. I found love and partnership and purpose. I found Penelope. He looked at his wife, his eyes bright with emotion. You have been my companion, my best friend, my lover, and my anchor. You gave me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You made me laugh when I wanted to cry and held me when grief threatened to overwhelm. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day that you let me sit down next to you under that tree. Penelope was crying openly now, and when she spoke, her voice shook with emotion. You say I saved you, but Harrison, we saved each other. We were both lost and grieving, both alone in the world, and we found each other at exactly the right moment. These 50 years have been the greatest adventure of my life. I love you more than words can express, more than I thought it was possible to love someone. You are my everything. They kissed as their family applauded and cheered, and in that moment, under the young willow tree that was growing in the place where their love had begun, everything was perfect. Harrison Blake lived to see his 80th birthday in 1933, surrounded by his family in the ranch house he had built with his own hands. Penelope was there beside him, 76 years old and still beautiful in his eyes. Their love had only grown stronger with time, deepening into something that transcended words. They spent their final years together in contentment, watching their great-grandchildren grow, seeing the ranch continue to thrive under Henry's guidance and eventually under the leadership of Henry's oldest son. The willow tree they had planted grew taller each year, becoming a landmark and a symbol of enduring love for the entire family. In the spring of 1936, Harrison became ill with pneumonia. Despite Dr. Mitchell's best efforts, and the efforts of his younger colleague who had taken over most of the practice, Harrison's aged body could not fight off the infection. On a warm April morning, with Penelope holding his hand and all his children gathered around his bed, Harrison Blake took his last breath. Penelope was devastated by the loss, as anyone would be after losing a partner of 58 years. But she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together, and in the memories of every precious moment they had shared. She continued to live at the ranch, cared for by her family, and every week she had someone take her to the willow tree. She would sit under its branches with a book, usually her old copy of Jane Eyre, and talk to Harrison as if he were sitting beside her. She told him about the family, about the new babies being born and the achievements of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told him how much she missed him, how empty the world felt without him in it. But she also told him about the joy she still found in life, about the sunsets and the wildflowers and the sound of children's laughter. She told him that their love story had been worth every moment, every tear and every smile. She told him that she would carry him in her heart until they met again. Penelope lived for 5 more years after Harrison's death, years filled with family and books and quiet contentment. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1941, at the age of 84, in the bed she had shared with Harrison for so many years. The family buried her next to Harrison in the Brownsville Cemetery, under a shared headstone that read, "Harrison and Penelope Blake. Beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Their love story began under a willow tree and will last for eternity. The ranch continued to thrive under the care of their descendants, generation after generation of Blakes working the land that Harrison had loved so much. The willow tree grew tall and strong, becoming ancient itself as decades passed, and it remained a sacred place for the family. Couples would go there to propose, to marry, to celebrate anniversaries, keeping alive the legacy of Harrison and Penelope. Years turned into decades, and the story of the lonely cowboy and the girl reading under the willow tree became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It became a reminder that love could be found in unexpected places, that grief did not have to be the end of happiness, and that when you found the right person, you should never let them go. The ranch house that Harrison built was preserved and maintained, eventually becoming a historical landmark. The bookshelf he had crafted with such care for Penelope still stood in the living room, now filled with books that belonged to their descendants. Her original copy of Jane Eyre was kept in a place of honor, its pages yellow and fragile, a tangible connection to that first day under the willow tree. The cattle operation that Harrison had started with a small herd grew into one of the most successful in Texas, providing for generations of his family. His great-great-grandchildren walked the same land he had walked, rode the same trails, worked the same red Texas dirt, and they did it all with pride, knowing they were continuing his legacy. But more than the ranch or the business or the land, Harrison and Penelope's greatest legacy was the love they had shown each other and the family they had created. They had proven that it was possible to find happiness after loss, that taking a chance on love was always worth the risk, and that true partnership could weather any storm. The willow tree, now over 100 years old, still stood at the edge of what had become the Blake family ranch, its branches providing shade and shelter just as they had on that August afternoon in 1878 when everything changed. It stood as a living monument to a love that had started with a simple decision. A lonely cowboy choosing to sit down next to a girl reading a book, and then choosing never to leave her side. And in the hearts and memories of their descendants, in the stories told around dinner tables and the lessons passed down through generations, Harrison and Penelope Blake lived on, their love eternal, their story a reminder that the most beautiful journeys often begin with a single moment of courage, a willingness to open your heart one more time, and the grace to recognize love when it finds you under a willow tree on a hot Texas afternoon.